The appraisal protects the lender, not the buyer. And when it comes in low, it can completely change how a Washington State real estate transaction goes. Joe, where does the appraisal show up in the contract?
Form 22A, the financing addendum. When you're financing through a bank, the bank always wants to make sure that the home is got the value to put the collateral against it. And so when they do that and there is a low appraisal, there's three things that could happen. The buyer could walk away, the seller could request them to pay the difference, and the buyer's under no obligation, or the seller could lower the purchase price down to the appraised value.
Yeah.
I guess there's a fourth option too. If it's super off, you can request, and it's usually at the buyer's expense, to have a reappraisal done.
What would you say is the most common?
Usually it's at value in the market we've been in, a lot of low appraisals.
Usually it comes back at value. Not a whole lot of fear with that. However, it does on occasion, and every once in a blue moon, it'll come back high, right? So if you get that, congratulations.
That's you might want to go do your own appraisal too, because usually they stop when it's at value. So if they're above value, it could even be greater value. One other thing is there's conditions to an appraisal. Depending on the type of loan, there's different conditions. Like FHA, you can't have cracked and peeling paint. And so you're looking for two things on an appraisal. You want it to come back at value with no work needed. If it's at value and there's work needed, that's the seller's responsibility to take care of it.
Yeah. Can that be negotiated?
You could try to negotiate it, but the buyer's under no obligation.
Right. So, Ashley, what do buyers misunderstand about appraisals?
They assume it's like a full property evaluation when really it's a lender risk tool, not a condition report. So first, it's not a home inspection, right? The appraiser isn't testing systems, crawling attics, or evaluating repair needs. They're primarily measuring value, comparing recent comparable sales, and confirming the property supports the loan amount. So it's also not a full property deep dive. It's a market-based valuation snapshot using comps, adjustments, and guidelines, not a guarantee of condition or future resale value. Another key misunderstanding is who the appraiser works for. The appraiser is engaged by the lender, not the buyer, even though the buyer pays for the appraisal. And their job is to protect the bank's lending position. Where emotions spike is when value comes in short. Buyers often panic and think this deal is dead. But in reality, that just opens negotiation and strategy options, price adjustments, additional comps, or restructuring terms. The biggest confusion is market value versus bank value. So market value, what a buyer is willing to pay in current competition. And then there's appraised value, what the lender is willing to support based on closed data.
And those numbers don't match often, right?
Right.
So something that happens very often for us is a friend will call and they'll say, hey, we'd like to hire an appraiser. And I'll ask them why. They want to find out what the value of their home is. They're thinking of selling. Which one do you think is a more accurate depiction of the actual value of the home right now? A realtor's comparable market analysis or an appraisal?
Good question, right? So it would be the realtor. So they're going to spend some time to analyze the comparables within the radius of your home. And it's going to be the most sold properties in that area, but that's going to give you the best data. And a lot of times when an appraiser is scheduled, the agent can go in there and show them the comps that they pulled too, to make sure that they're seeing those comparables.
Yeah. So, Chris, the unthinkable happens and the appraisal comes in low. What actually happened?
Yeah, so there's several things that can happen. I mean, it's basically another set of negotiations. This is really the simplest way to explain it. So there's the seller can reduce the price, the buyer can bring in additional cash to close. You do have an addendum that has a protection against low appraisals. So that is always good to put in there if the buyer is trying to be competitive, and it will give the seller a little bit more risk mitigation that way. And you could just straight up terminate the deal if we come to an agreement on what's going to happen with that, bridging that gap. If you are in a multiple offer situation and you have a seller or listing agent call you up and say, hey, why don't we just strike this escalation clause and just do a straight offer? Don't do that, because the escalation clause actually has to be read by that appraiser, which shows that there was competition. So they don't have to look at any of the other offers, but with an escalation clause, they do, which shows the trajectory of the market.
Let me ask you, if the appraisal comes back low and there is not an appraisal gap addendum, what most likely happens?
Most likely what happens is the seller reduces the price. That's what I find to be the most common. If you're the listing agent, you're representing a seller, you definitely want to get a reconsideration with the bank and see if we can bridge that gap. But, appraisers, they don't usually disagree with each other. So it's really, really hard to get that value up once it comes in low. Another thing that a lot of people don't understand is with FHA and VA appraisals, those stick to the property for 6 months. So basically, they cannot reappraise that with an FHA or VA loan. It is recorded on that property.
All right. So what's the biggest myth out there about appraisals? What do people not understand?
I think a lot of people think it's going to kill the deal automatically. It usually is, everything works out. We've had this happen with buyers, we've had this happen with sellers, and it's not an automatic deal killer. There's usually a way that we can get to the finish line.
Also, that's a hard and fastened rule of what the house is worth. House is actually worth what somebody's going to pay for. Appraised value is what a lender's going to lend against it, but a value is worth what someone's willing to pay for it. And so sometimes people want a house so bad because of a unique feature, they don't care about the appraised value. They're going to come to an agreement with the seller directly.
Or even sometimes if it's a competitive situation where people are waiving that appraisal, they're kind of almost forced to have to come up with that money or they're going to lose their earnest money. So there's always that challenge as well.
Yeah. We do have earnest money protected with a low appraisal as long as we use a financing addendum.
You can waive financing and not waive your appraisal. There is a separate form for just the appraisal. Highly recommend that because, again, it shows we're going to close. We are financially good, but we want the bank to agree with this number that we're offering. So that's a nice way to just let them know we're very confident, but we do want to see that it appraises.
Finally, for a cash deal, when do we schedule the appraisal?
No
No appraisal.
appraisals. We love
No.
cash. Cash is king, and you are bringing it from your bank to the signing table. So no appraisal needed.
No. All right. It typically doesn't get in the way of the transaction. For the most part, it tends to be a little bit of a moot point. So not something that people have to be as worried about as they often are, because that's the one contingency that can really drag on sometimes. And so it leaves buyers feeling unsettled until we get that report back. This is how it actually works in Washington real estate transactions every day. For more answers like this, visit themadronagroup.com FAQ, where we break down the entire process step by step. Thanks for watching.